this week, and I commented on this online as well, so I would say it to anyone who would be willing to listen. Our guest this week is Annie Finch. Annie, do I see you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Welcome, Annie.
Yay, Annie. Thank you.
Yeah. Annie has returned to join us again this year, which I'm super grateful for. There is no limit to Annie's knowledge, and she has perhaps the most comprehensive repertoire of books on prosody and sound and meter and form in the contemporary. The depth of her understanding and the breadth of her understanding is as illustrated by what she's written and the way she talks is beyond compare. So it's a true gift to have Annie with us because in addition to the self-evident technical capability, she brings with her the finest of spirits. I don't know, Rusty, if you want to say more. By the way, Annie, Rusty's a little bit under the weather, so she won't be talking a whole bunch.
Okay.
And so, Annie, anything? I'm sorry, Rusty, anything?
I'll just say that Annie has an amazing website that one can join and engage with many of the ideas that Annie is shares, and also I love her her engagement with what I would call the more than just the materials plane of thinking, and the way she has written in her many books on craft and deeply looking at prosody has changed my mind and opened me, and in many ways supported the deeper spirit of who I think I always have been. But Annie, you are a guiding spirit in my development as having faith that as a writer, even if I think the world is maybe not ready for the depth of energy that brings the spirit into language, it is probably the most essential work that we do, and I feel deep trust in your voice, and I'm so grateful that you're with us today.
And yeah, so Annie, welcome to just sort of put a little cherry on top of that. Wonderful Sunday from Rusty. If there is evidence, like, so I have a hypothesis that people typically think of prosody as something that's stodgy, full stop. And your work, your voice, to me illustrates that even if one writes in the most wildly experimental of shapes, forms, types, and sounds, their prosody has a way to heighten the work of what we do. And so I'm just going to pause there. And as always, Annie,
I'll just add just a quick note. Helene Cizou says the border makes up the homeland. It prohibits and gives passage in the same stroke. And I think what Annie has taught me is that the border of using form frees me to see what is spiritually outside that border and outside of my logical mind, my conscious mind, because it animates a deeper self, because I move beyond the simple logic. So the border of prosody and form, I've really learned, is both a passageway. Thanks to Annie. All right, that's it for me.
Yes, navigating intention and non-intention has been also one of those conversations we've been having around prosody and forms. With that, Annie, I'll turn it over to you. As always, this is your time to do with as you wish. Rely on us for questions or contributions as you see, and we'll go from here. Thank you, Annie.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much. It's just lovely to hear you just kind of meeting me in this incredible realm of the magic of prosody and the prosody of magic. It's a realm that has so much to offer to so many people, and there's so much joy and freedom in it. And so when I hear you talk about it, I just know that you're here with me, and I appreciate that so deeply, because as you say, so many people don't quite get it, and they think of prosody as stodgy. So, I would offer a word that's been on my mind a little bit lately, which is nerdy, as an alternative. And nerdiness is kind of cool nowadays, but stodginess is like never cool. So what's the difference? I mean, the difference to me is that stodginess is about following rules that somebody else set up, but nerdiness is about loving something so much that you make the rules part of your life and part of your freedom. And so you can go anywhere with those rules. You know what I mean? Like you could be a jazz nerd or a Scottish country dance nerd, and that's very different from.
I know exactly what you mean. I was having a conversation with Bob Hass in front of an audience at City Lights, and we apologized for geeking out.
Right.
And it directly connects to this this word nerdiness. I love it.
Yeah. So if we could reclaim nerdiness for prosody instead of stodgy, it might be a step in the right direction. Yeah. So I've been. It's a real treat to be back here after a year, and sort of with a bit of a memory of what we talked about last year, and it's made me feel aware of the way that my feeling and thinking about prosody has changed over the year, and that in itself reminds me the way that rhythm and pattern create the chance for so much freedom within them. Just the pattern of doing this a year apart, what that allows. And it's funny because in my regular life, I am not a systematic person. Like I'm probably the least rhythmic person I know in terms of my habits, daily habits, like when I eat or sleep or whatever. I mean, that's not always true, but like I'm not very self-regulated. But in my poetry, pattern is obsessive to me, and structure. Or it gives me life, and it gives me just a connection with spirit, as Rusty was talking about. So a couple of things I'd like to share today, and I did look briefly at all of the poems, and I have a couple of comments based on that as well that the participants sent in. I'd like to say that I think this idea of prosody as stodgy came from the association of prosody with one hegemonic meter, which was iambic pentameter, which dominated so thoroughly that if you look at metrical poetry over the last 500 years, it's 95% of it or whatever will be in iambic pentameter or iambic meter, sometimes tetrameter. And this was at the expense of all the other meters, which were relegated to children's poetry and oral poetry, like the anapaests of the night before Christmas, right? It was the night before Christmas and all through the house, or a little couple of poems by Longfellow managed to squeak their way in, the trochees of Hiawatha. And, with this basic sense, though, that iambic pentameter was the only respectable meter, then form got to be, it felt like a prison, and no wonder. So when Ezra Pound said to break the pentameter was the first heave, I think he said that at the beginning of, that Free Verse Manifesto, whatever it was, 1912, over 100 years ago. And I think during that 100 years, people have forgotten to look exactly at what Pound said. To break the pentameter was the first heave. Okay, it was the first heave, but that was the key heave. And he didn't realize what would happen afterwards, which was that all form would end up just kind of becoming random and, not anything that people valued anymore. And I think the baby really went out with the bathwater, because if you go back to what I've been calling metrical diversity, and you can reclaim all the other meters, not the pentameter, which I don't think Pound, who wrote beautiful dactyls, I don't think he intended to throw out all the meters. He just wanted to break the hegemony of one meter over form. But what happened was the hegemony was broken, and then everything else went with it, and we ended up with no prosody. And I feel that to me that would be life-threatening to live without prosody. I need it. I actually need it. And I think the more I am a poet, the more I need prosody. So that's the one major point I want to make, is just diversity of form and keeping that in mind. And when I see experimental or exploratory poets today, some of them, or many of us, I guess, are starting to return to form, but so many people are doing only iambic pentameter again. And it makes me want to tear my hair out, because that's just returning to the original problem. So diversity and versatility and keeping a full range. And here I just want to make a plug for my book, A Poet's Craft, which does talk about writing in all these different ways. Anapest, dactyls, trochees, as well as, and amphibrax, my favorite, as well as iambs and many other meters as well. And it just gives you a sense, when you actually have all the tools in your toolbox, then it doesn't become a straitjacket. So that was my first point, metrical diversity. The second point I want to make is metrical consistency. And it just seems to me that some of us, for good reason, are afraid of consistency. And yet consistency is it's the food of the power that makes prosody worth it. Without consistency, it's really almost not worth doing. And that can sound hard, it can sound obnoxious, it can sound too heavy, and I'm really aware of all that. I'm an extremely rebellious person, and I hate being told what to do. But I just feel that if you're going to start writing in a meter, John Hollander had it right, that you create a metrical contract with the reader. And if you are consistent, it's like you build up a certain rhythmical trust, a physical trust. I mean, it's really like fucking. I mean, you create a trust in the reader. And then if you don't build up that trust, you can't play with it and change it, and you lose your power over them. And you lose the whole transaction, the whole experience of the gift. You can't give your gift very well anymore. So I would really emphasize the importance that once you start a meter, be consistent with it. And if you're going to do that, then it has to be a meter that you love. And I think that's where sometimes people make a mistake. You need to feel that you chose it freely. So when I teach poets who haven't worked with form before, what I normally like to do is work with an existing poem that they have, like a free verse poem, find a passage that they really love, like their favorite passage, and then what is the form and the rhythm of that passage, and then we just turn that into a consistent pattern. So it's a very simple procedure, really. Step one, take a poem that you like. Step two, find your favorite part of that poem. Step three, scan it, and scanning is key because it helps you understand what the pattern is. Step four, take that scanned pattern and just write a whole poem in that form. Very, very simple. And when you've done that many times, you begin to understand how metrical diversity affects your life as a poet and what different voices you have that come out through the different rhythms. And what I've discovered is it's like, we contain multitudes, as Whitman said, we contain rhythmic and metrical multitudes as well. So the different voices that come out in the different rhythms that we have different personalities, different needs. You can have conversations among them within your body of poetry, within your body of work. So if you get to know a poem that you've written in, say you write in, you find a poem that has a trochaic passage that you love, you write more trochees, you get a sense of what trochees mean to you. Then you find a passage in another poem of yours, maybe you wrote a line or a stanza in anapaests in a free verse poem. Well, you take those anapaests, you follow them through, you give them they're like a horse, you give them their head, you let them go. You follow those anapaests and you find the voice that comes through in those anapaests. You get to know, who is my anapaestic voice? Who is my trochaic voice? Then when you're going through your life, a poem starts to come to you. It maybe the first phrase that comes into your mind comes in anapaests. You're like, oh my gosh. And then you know that, you're familiar with that terrain. You can just go with it. And so it's like you have this vocabulary as part of your life, like your gestures, like your idioms that you speak, like your facial expressions, your meters and your forms just become part of you. And then being a poet who knows form can be a very freeing thing. So that's my general spiel. And I did look at the poems briefly that all the poets sent in, and I just had thoughts about a couple of them because a couple of them are in meter in the first line or two, and so I just kind of wanted to talk about what I noticed. And so I'm just curious, have you all done any scanning at all yet? Have you
Oh yeah, so far we've done a little bit of talking about syllables. This week we're talking about accents, and next week we'll get into accentual-syllabics. We've done an overview of scansion, but haven't fully developed. This
Yeah.
is a scan.
Okay, so maybe the timing will be perfect actually, because I was looking for accentual-syllabic, and I just noticed in, let's see, I've got it in my handwriting here. Manny Blackshore. There's a line of iambics right in the beginning here. Retired to the Library of Congress. You don't miss your water till the well runs dry. Elvis said he wanted gospel for his mama. My sister scratched his pelvic love in lacquer. Great line. I love that last line. My sister scratched his pelvic love in lacquer. Fantastic. So, it just strikes me that this poem is about half an iambic pentameter. And I'm just curious what would happen as an experiment if the whole thing were fully an iambic pentameter, and what might change, because then it would. I guess one thing that you may have already talked about is that
losing it.
Pardon? Yeah, sorry. Are you losing the connection?
I can't hear something. Just disappeared.
Oh, so Annie, I think that's somebody that should be on mute. Let me see if I can figure out who's making a little noise there. Oh, I think we're okay now.
Okay. So yeah, just in a way, the tighter the form is, the more eloquent you can be with some variations on it. So the beauty of writing poetry is that you can always change it and you don't lose it. Like when I'm painting, which is one of my hobbies, you can easily ruin something forever. But with a poem, you really can't ruin it forever, which is such a gift for us. So I would just experiment with this one. Like the line, Philly Larkin said I was the sound of yes. That's a really awesome anapestic line, right? Philly Larkin said I was the sound of yes. It's a completely different rhythm than you don't miss your water till the well runs dry. A much more kind of staid and rhythmic iambic pentameter. So since the poem does have these two rhythms in it, one could choose to go with one or the other, or even alternate them in a conscious fashion, like in a pattern that's predictable, so that 1, 2, 3, fourth stanza could become one voice, and the meter of the fifth stanza, first line, could become the other voice. They could alternate like a certain number of lines per meter or something like that. And I would encourage playing with that. So I think, given where we are in our poetry right now, a lot of people have never had permission to be consistent. And I've discovered that a lot of the work I do when I teach poetry is so simple. It's just giving people permission to be consistent and to be aware of the patterns and to stick with them and see where which is a great gift to the reader. So I also noticed a wonderful trochaic line hiding in, let's see, intro. This was intraocular lens. Yeah, intraocular lens near the Tom Lakis poem. I thought the line, you go blind as did your grands and great-grands. It's just such a wonderful trochaic line. And then continues in the second line. And then it kind of loses it, right? Becomes more dactylic, and then just goes on and kind of changes. But the beginning is such a strong trochaic beginning. So I would experiment again with just following that rhythm through and seeing where it goes.
Huh. Okay.
And yeah, and then with Eva Heisler's self-portrait as Marat's vinegar-soaked turban, great name. I assume, Eva, that you're aware that these are mostly hendecasyllabic lines. It looks like you've worked with this meter before, and this was conscious because it's an unusual meter, and it's really wonderfully handled. I think you have a really nice ear, but I do notice that the dactylic foot. So a hendecasyllabic line is 11 syllables, but it's arranged into 4 trochaic feet and 1 dactylic foot. So the trochees are double, bum 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 bum, and the dactyl is triple, dun 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 dun. So normally it would go bum 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 ba dum bum 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 ba dum bum 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 like that. But I notice with Eva, you've got threadwear, patch dye, would be restored as turban. So that's a perfect one. If you'll hear the 3-syllable foot, the longer foot is smack in the middle. So it's bum 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 ba dum bum bum bum. Threadbare, patch dye, would be restored as turban. Threadbare, patch dye, would be restored as turban. Bum 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 ba dum bum bum bum. Hope everybody's got that. So she's got the dactyl in the middle, but some of the other lines have the dactyl in the second foot. So for example, blistered skull, I absorb the treacheries of blistered skull, I absorb the treacheries of bum 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 bada bum 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 bum. So, I would say in the spirit of consistency again, I would normally put the dactyl in the third foot. Some sapphics, such as Timothy Steele's sapphics against anger, very good example of the form. He puts the dactyl in the second foot there, I believe. But anyway, I would say pick one or the other and stick with it. And then if you ever did want to change it, it's going to be for a good reason. So that would be basically my advice on prosody, and I think on poetry as well. And increasingly, I don't really feel the difference. I have on my website, there's anniefinch.com, there's an article, a little essay. It's under the section called Gifts for Poets. It's called What is a Poem? And I pretty much lay out there what I've been, the fruit of 30 years of thinking about this question, what is a poem, which started when I was getting a master's in creative writing, and we would go out for beers in University of Houston. We just drink beer and talk for hours, the poets and the fiction writers. What is a poem anyway? What's the difference? And the only thing that's held up for me over this however many decades is simply that a poem is structured by repetition. Poem is structured by repetition. And I've written out the whole argument in detail with the counter arguments in this essay, What is a Poem, at my website. And by structured through repetition, I mean that it's not just repetition for fun, it's repetition to hold things together. And in order for repetition to be structural, to hold things together, it needs to be predictable. And so in these hendecasyllabics, in the self-portrait as Marat's vinegar-soaked turban, if you're going to use repetition as structure, then the repetition needs to be consistent. Otherwise, it's not going to be holding up its end of the bargain. And then the reader won't trust you that you're doing it on purpose when you do it. Right?
Can I say a question there?
Please, yeah.
This is Eva Heisler. I don't know anything about meter. I was just counting syllables.
Oh, that's so wonderful. My goodness. Well, I don't know.
So in terms of repetition, it's not just a repetition of syllable, a syllabic pattern. Is that not enough?
In English, normally syllabic patterns are not even audible usually. So a syllabic poem like Marianne Moore's poems, for example, normally you only really absorb the form of it when you see it on the page. It's very hard to hear it. Like if you try to read one of Marianne Moore's poems aloud, you're not going to hear the form really, because it's not registering, because of the nature of the English language, which is an accentual language. When you don't have regular accents, you're not really going to hear it. So if so most poetry, that most formal poetry in English, most metrical, most meter in English is accentual-syllabic, which means it's a combination of accent and syllables. So you have a combination of, basically in English you have an accent every 2 or 3 syllables as you speak, right? So you can, that sort of fits into either falling or rising, 2 or 3, double or triple. So you could have iams, which are double rising, bum, bum, or you can have trochees, which are double falling, bum, bum, or you could have anapaests triple rising, bum, 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 or you can have dactyls triple falling, bum, 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 right? So that's it, every 2 or 3 syllables, rising or falling. And so these are the building blocks of accentual syllabic meters. So yeah, you'll have something called a foot, which will be a certain number of syllables, and the accent will be in a certain place. So like in Shakespeare, you've got, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? I mean, if you just counted 10 syllables, it could be, this is the first day of, let's see, this is the first day of the summer. This is the first day of the summer. That's 10 syllables, right? But it doesn't sound like, shall I compare thee to a summer day, because it doesn't have the alternating regular pattern of accent and non-accent. So you're going to need both if you're going to really do poetry in the most common meter in English, which is accentual syllabic. Does that work, Eva?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's really clear.
Tom or Manny, any questions? She highlighted some lines in your poems. Any other questions for Annie?
Annie,
No.
thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
No questions for me. Thank you for seeing that, because it's totally invisible to me.
Well, I hope it will start to be visible in the process of scansion. And again, a plug, because A Poet's Craft, I've written everything I know, and I hope it will be helpful to people in terms of how to scan, how to find meter, what the different points are.
It's a lovely book. It's high and mighty on my shelf for sure.
I
Yeah,
really,
me too. And I've got Post-it marks everywhere in it, and I open it all the time. So it's great.
I really do think it's helpful, because I really feel this is, you know, as I said, it did save my life, and you know, I just couldn't recommend it more highly for something incredibly fun and something that makes poetry like open up in major ways. So I think for all of you, especially who are using it, and I think almost all the poems, but I noticed the ones that were most conspicuous. You know, if you're already doing it, that means that even if you weren't aware of it consciously, it means that your body has absorbed it. It means that, you know, you've read these poems in this meter somewhere along the line. And of course, that's how poetry used to be transmitted orally, and people didn't have to think about it. But since we've had a century of poetry on the page and sort of lost the connection with these life rhythms, then we need to some extent, bring it back consciously. And scansion is a very, very good way to do that. And I do lay out in A Poet's Craft my recommended system of scansion, which is to start with the accents, then fill in the non-accented syllables, and then finally put in the foot boundaries. And after you've read it, that will make more sense to you. But I think that order is very important for those of you who have started and know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so Annie, you know, the strategy in prosody and revision is similar, and they're conjoined, your approach. So I just get people counting syllables. This week we're going to talk about how to find an accent in a line and talk about accentuals, and then we're going to do in the next week it'll be an accentual syllabic conversation. So
wonderful.
Yeah, the two merge or conjoin quite well.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'm so glad you're going to be doing that, because, yeah, it's great that you're doing this class, and I'm so glad that prosody lives. So,
Yay, Annie.
Good luck to everybody. Thank you so much. Great to talk
Thanks,
to you.
Annie.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye, Rusty.
Bye.
Bye.
Could you say the name of the book one more time? I'm sorry.
A Poet's Craft.
Thank you.
It's a very big book, and it's an incredible resource.